Oh, hi.
Oh, hi.
Hi. You're here to listen to our second episode of the Doing Good Badly podcast. And this was actually our first episode of the Doing Good Badly podcast. But then the devil bought Everlane. And so we had to switch things up.
We had to talk about it. Yeah, we had to talk about it.
Yeah. Is there anything our 3 3/4 listeners need to know about this episode before we just let her rip?
Well, we want you to know that the episode isn't about political commentary, right? It's really about a moment in time. And it's about a particular speech that happened in Davos that we think is actually really important and a great jumping off point to have a really important discussion around the world of business, where we're going, the many different aspects of the capitalist system that we all exist in. And we think that's the really important conversation. And I know a lot of people will have, obviously, a want or a need to have, an opinion about the politician that made that speech, which is Mark Carney. And we obviously have some perspectives about Carney. And we want you to know that this isn't, political commentary. This is more about our perspective on what that speech and what that speech represented and what it said actually means for the world of business and the world of sustainability, more importantly.
Yeah. And I think the only other thing to know is that this was our very first recording, of which we have now done many more, and we have many more episodes coming. And we have decided that we are allowed to laugh at each other when we are talking. And so we're very straight-laced. And we promise not to be like that in the future.
No. So thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy the conversation.
Doing Good Badly.
Doing Good Badly. Welcome to the first episode of Doing Good Badly. We're here.
Yeah, we're going to do our best to do good, not us do it badly.
Ideally not.
Ideally, we're going to do good, but we're going to talk about doing good badly.
Absolutely. So let's get into it. What is doing good and what does doing good badly actually mean? So
be a helper.
Be a helper. So for
mostly
us,
for the helpers.
Yeah, right. So what is doing good badly? Well, what we've seen in the work that we've done over decades is that organizations, for the most part, are trying to do good one way or another, whatever that might mean to them. Often what we also see is that they're sort of doing it badly. And it's quite often not because of malice or, they're not trying to do badly, but they have different incentives or constraints and compromises or employees or interests that really drive those stories in the wrong direction. And there's a lot of realities under that that we don't talk about in the public, right? We only see the news article or the outcome of an event, but rarely talk about the conditions that actually led to that. And so for us, it's not just like the name isn't just the diagnosis of one company and canceling people or canceling companies. It's not about this. That's not what we're trying to do.
We might cancel people once in a while.
Maybe once in a while we might. For the most part, that's not our focus
not
necessarily. Right?
Focus.
But it's also like a collective description of like societally, like people are trying to do good, but overall what we're seeing is like we're just having crisis after crisis all over the world. And, collectively, we've got a lot of work to do. And we really want to understand why this is happening. And even though people have the best of intentions, why are we still not doing good very well? Why are we doing it badly over and over again, right? And so that's really the big impetus and what we're talking about when we talk about doing good badly.
Yeah. I also think doing good badly is folks as you said, have the best intentions, but sometimes they're kind of doing someone else's kind of good. You know, in our work with businesses, we have these kind of like folks they're trying so hard to do good that sometimes they don't find the way it fits for them. And the way it's kind of fits, and it's poetic, and it meets their business model, and it meets their intentions, and yeah. So we believe people are good and want to do good, and sometimes they just are doing it a little bit badly.
Absolutely. And so let's talk about, before we dive into this episode in particular, our very first episode, let's talk about what brought us here, the two of us having this conversation. I know that for the two of us, we've had a lot of conversations about a lot of different things, and we're like, what can we do together where we have more of these conversations? Literally.
Yeah. And I have found, really, I feel like we've been having these like random conversations kind of over the years. Like, I don't know when I feel like every time I chat with you, I'm like, oh, she's a good one. Like, she's maybe doing good. Well, and I'm interested in her, Joe, I've been interested in your practice for a long time. And we both have I think we come from similar backgrounds, which I always find really interesting in the kind of like purpose driven business change space. The folks with that marketing angle or those like storytelling chops are always so exciting for me to talk to. So that's kind of one thing. And then we finally were like, let's have a creative outlet together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll, and those conversations just continued, right? And you're right, over the years. And I agree, like I'm a big fangirl of your practice as well. And, you've done great work, and you've been very, I think, bold about the work too in the impact space and what it means to really do good as a business, and not just like what certifications you might need, because obviously your work's heavily, at least originated in the B Corp movement.
Absolutely.
But what does it mean?
Yeah.
Right. But what does it mean from like a strategy perspective? What do you do beyond that? Like, there's so much more to like doing a really good job as a impact focused company or fund or any kind of organization that goes beyond that. And so, agree with you. And I think for me, my consulting practice, because this is what we joke about. We're two consultants that are like on the sustainability train for a long time. We've seen lots of different things, and that's why we're here to talk about the things that sometimes people might not want to talk about publicly necessarily, or haven't had the time to dive into. And it's really interesting to, from my practice in the sort of accelerator incubator space with startups and then also in the work that I've done with different even investment funds and organizations in the capital space, to figure out how do we bring impact and the conversation on sustainability and all of its parameters into a strategy and into the thesis of what you're trying to do. And it's been really interesting to really like bring those two, sometimes different concepts that are at tension together, and doing a strategy where you're trying to be, scaling and revenue generating, but at the same time you want to do good in the world that can have a lot of like polarizing pulls for you as a company or investor or operator. So that's really like, where I come from, which I think like also adds like an interesting angle in terms of the work that you do as well in your practice, the decade impact.
Yeah. And I feel like I first heard of you when you were still with League of Innovators.
Oh, yes.
And I was so interested in program development and education in the space, because I feel like the heart of everything is, being able to, if you don't have the vocabulary, you're not going to be able to write that song. If you don't have the tools, you're not going to be able to do that. And so much of my practice over the years has been developing programs, and so I was always kind of taken with, and that like working directly with like younger entrepreneurs, where like they haven't been beaten down by business as usual, and they're imagining, and they're a little bit more, I think, not having had the opportunity to work with lots of really young people in my practice, but I imagine it must be so refreshing to have like, okay, you are open to new ideas. And
yeah, and I don't think and it's interesting. Yeah, they've not been jaded by the world of work and the world yet. And they're really, which I know what we'll talk about, is like stubbornly optimistic about what they're trying to build in the world, right? On their own terms. And I think that experience over the years where I worked with League of Innovators and a lot of young entrepreneurs across Canada, and even dipping into the US a little bit, just had a lot of that exposure to young people that were trying to build really interesting and continue to build really interesting businesses, for a lot of them impact focused in one way or another, that have, changed industries to some degree. And it's really exciting to see that belief. And I think I see a lot of people in later stages in careers who've maybe lost a bit of that like spice to like create change and drive disrupting industries, right? Like, how can we do that if we don't have that desire to do so?
Yeah. And honestly, I think you just kind of nailed why we think these conversations are important, at least to have be able to have kind of ecstatic moments of like going down these rabbit holes on these ideas that are kind of underpin the system we live in, because I feel like both of us have been Trojan horsing in our careers. We kind of like go into a space and we're like, all right, like what can we do here? Or how can we engage these folks, because I know I've done a lot of like team business design. And so how do we get people really excited? How do we pump up the vibes in an organization so that we can deliver positive outcomes? But it's hard to turn on the news right now and feel motivated. And we are going to talk about how we got here.
We certainly are. Yeah. And just, a note on this podcast too, it's like, it's meant to like dive deep and dissect these issues and maybe unearth some concepts or ideas that maybe aren't part of the general conversation. And we're going to touch on a lot of things that might be like negative and noisy in the world, and that's okay, because that's the only way to like carve out this my perspective, like the new path of like, hey, we need to, if we want a different world, which I think a lot of people in the sustainability and impact space have been saying for a long time, is like, if we want a world that we all want to live in, we might have to look at a different way of building it than we've traditionally done. So I'm excited about those conversations and continuing, despite everything that's happening in the world, to stay optimistic about what we can create.
Yeah. And I think also being able to have these conversations, hopefully people that listen feel like this is a gift, like it's a generous thing that we're doing to create the
space to have these conversations too, right?
The space. I remember, and I am going to reference things that I can't remember where I heard them, because I'm a link brain, not a detail brain. But I remember hearing an explanation years ago why Noam Chomsky didn't do TV interviews. And I know he's in the Epstein files, and so like we get it. I don't know all the details. But apparently Noam Chomsky didn't do TV interviews because he said there were 600 words between commercials. And 600 words is the introduction to a problem. And so you can't have a real conversation or get any amount of depth in with 600 words. So I do think this isn't necessarily going to be a 30-minute podcast. Like, this is not about that. It's not about like snippets. It's about being able to have exciting, stimulating conversations about things that we agree on and we disagree about too, right? So we're not trying to be the 600 words between commercials.
I love that. I think that sums it up great. It's like we're not that introduction.
Yeah. And so in the spirit of what do we start with? How do we, what's our first conversation about? We've been cooking this up for a while. And we were cooking it up before Davos. But we felt like Mark Carney did a good thing at Davos, and that speech was kind of singular and really important. And so we're going to start with Mark Carney. We, as a disclaimer, we're not grading his performance as the Canadian Prime Minister right now. I think both Joe and I know Mark Carney. We've been in a parasocial relationship with Mark Carney for a lot longer than he has been PM. So I think that in the spirit of optimism and action, that was a great call to action for folks to think about a new way of doing things and a new way of being on a tiny planet hurtling through space. And that's and so we're gonna start with Mark Carney. Sadly, we don't have time to go into all the Carney thirst trap world of the internet. We don't have that kind of love for him, but yeah, we're gonna do our best. But I have been really wanting to call this episode "Sexy Carney," so I just had to get it in at least once. At the Sexy Carney. Yeah.
And it's incredible to see like where the internet takes things.
People are amazing.
Look, I'm a politician. I'm not above taking credit for the Canadian funding that helped you share this story with the world. I might not have been here when the decision was made, but I'm here now. So, yeah, I greenlit this thing. I stood up to the Americans. I made this thing made. Yeah.
I'm standing on business. Booked and busy. Is this how it's done? Am I looking into the right camera? Will this do numbers on X? Should I turn up the rage bait? Fuck.
I'm ready. I am ready to lead you.
People are smart and good and so creative.
It's so creative, and it's like always like I'm like, oh, they are taking it there. Okay, very interesting. So this was like a fun unearthing there for that. But let's start maybe like with the quote, or with many quotes from that speech. First of all, that we can bring in here and that we might. And so the quote that we come back to and that we think is like, pretty prolific here is, nostalgia is not a strategy. From the fracture, we can build something better, stronger, more just. And of course, this is, part of the speech. We will link up the speech in the show notes. But I think this is a great, both looking back historically, but also looking forward quote that's sort of saying to all of us, at least from my vantage point in the world that I live in, is thinking like, okay, like things have happened. The world is as it is. Business has done lots of different things on this path, and we'll talk about how we got here. But we can't necessarily rely on like how great things were in the past, because it's certainly not going to get us to a better path in the future. So we need to re-examine like, where we are as the world of business, as leaders, founders, operators, and like, what do we build from now? Which I think for me is like part of the real like ethos of this quote and of this speech at Davos is like, hey, this is like an opportunity. I know this was like, obviously the speech was very political in nature and had a lot of political undertones for good reason. But this has like a big call to action for business and for the world of business at large.
Yeah. And I think I 100% agree. And the way I've kind of been explaining Mark Carney to folks in conversations that have just met him as PM, that think he's this guy that kind of came out of nowhere and had this massive rise. He's been doing kind of exceptional work as an economist, central banker, and honestly, I kind of think philosopher about what capitalism is and what it might be. Carney, as a politician, has to play center. I think deep in his heart, he's a lot further left than he is, than the way he is showing up. And so I think it's important to kind of talk about a little bit about his history. But, my explanation to people is that, in traditional kind of business and capitalism, a tree is a piece of furniture, or it's a fuel you can put in a wood stove. But in the eyes of, Mark Carney, I think he really understands that it's a chair, or it's fuel, or maybe it's a carbon sink, and maybe it's a keeper of traditional knowledge, and it might even be a sovereign being. I think that he has a more expansive perception or recognition of what value is, and I think as sustainability consultants, that is integral to the work we've been doing for a long time. Is we have a more expansive, we have a wider spectrum of how we see and understand value and value creation. And so I think, unlike most anyone in position of global leadership, he has a pretty expansive view of capital and what that means, and value and what that means, and potentially the future and what we can have. And I know I'm a pretty big fangirl, so I feel like don't come for me in the comments. You don't have to like Carney as a politician to recognize some people are kind of destined for where they are. Maybe I can run through a brief summary of Mark Carney. Yeah. As I think many people know, he was born in the Northwest Territories, grew up in Edmonton, was a whip-smart little kid from a middle-class family. He's not a Nepo baby at all, and won a hockey scholarship to Harvard, went on to complete a bachelor at Harvard, went to do his master's in economics at master's and PhD in economics at Oxford. So he was a central banker. He worked in a lot of large financial institutions and asset management firms. Was the governor of the Bank of Canada, appointed by Stephen Harper in 2003. A lot of the reason that we survived the 2008 financial crisis was due to some of the very good work that Mark Carney was doing at the Bank of Canada and the Department of Finance Canada. Went on to be the governor of the Bank of England, of course, right before Brexit. They were in a famous quote that Carney cites himself, they'd never had an expat from anywhere being the positioned as the governor of the Bank of England. And when they told the Queen, she said, well, Canadians are very dependable or reliable. So, I think he's a quintessential kind of Canadian, very reliable. But what's really interesting is his history post central banking. He was in 2020, he served as the United Nations Secretary General's Special Envoy on Climate Action and Finance. Again, speaking to that recognition of the spectrum of value. He led the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. He was launched at COP26, and that was aimed at accelerating the transition to a low carbon economy. He served as an informal advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, leading into the COVID pandemic. You may not like everything that happened with the government in the COVID pandemic. In my own opinion, we we tested a universal basic income in this country, and it worked during, a global crisis, and we were all on the other side of it. And some people did better than others, but not necessarily anyone was completely left behind in that time. And then now he's the, obviously our PM. And I think he's kind of like the mascot for everything good about, he's really helping Canada as a nation live into this vision of what a reasonable, reliable country might look like in the new world order, and what a brave nation might look like in a world of bullies. That's my long rant.
Absolutely. That's a great timeline of his rise to prime minister. But like, what really got him here? He certainly wasn't the traditional public servant, right, that we see in politics quite often. I would also add to his accolades or his timeline of events is that he did write a book called Values,
of course. Oh my gosh.
Building a Better World for All, which was published in 2021.
Just in COVID, no big deal.
Just during COVID. And so I think that sort of defines what I think he feels or what he centers as important in conversations, right? Whether it's about business or whether it's about leadership. I think the values piece is critical, and why we also find it, Christy and I find it really interesting because, in the world of sustainability and impact, we talk about values as really big drivers for motivation and for sticking to what is really important in the life cycle of a business.
Yeah. And I also think, just a little aside about the coverage of the speech, I thought was so kind of adorable that we heard over and over again, well, he wrote it himself. But, having this kind of parasocial relationship with Carney, we knew that. I knew he wrote his own speech. My goodness. Brilliant fella.
And I think what's interesting too is, there was a lot of very positive feedback, obviously from Canadians, politicians, but also from what I would say is folks in the business world, right? We had Larry Fink from BlackRock saying that it was a speech for the ages. I think fairly significant in terms of commentary was coming not just from politics, but from folks that were operating in the business world. And I would also, maybe our not favorite person necessarily, Professor Scott Galloway, who is a podcaster and a prof and a speaker on many topics. But he called it the best speech at the World Economic Forum this year. Which I think is another great testament to Carney and the content of the speech, right? I think it was a very good speech, and there's a lot of sound bites from it, but I think it really also represented so much more to people in this time in our world than just a speech, right? It was like a call to action for everybody to pull up their boots and figure out what role are you playing in what is happening in the world, and what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, what are you going to do about it, and what you do matters. I think just that idea that what you do matters, and this is not a geopolitical podcast, so we don't really want to dig deeply into the relationship between Canada and the U.S. and the U.S. and the world and the 51st state and all that nonsense. We know that's not happening. And I do feel post-speech, we feel more safety in thinking that, or more confidence in that thought. But as as consultants, like when I was watching the speech, I just kept thinking I could replace business for the world, this idea of this system. And it's such a, I think they're very close together, this idea of a new way. And so, I think that idea of the new way is really important. And in the spirit of a new way, and Carney's rise, I think it's also, and Joe, you mentioned like the Larry Fink's introduction, and kind of follow up to the speech at Davos this year. In 2026, the speech was refreshing for me because I feel like, how did we get here? Like, how did we get here?
How did we get here? It's a great segue to our big question.
How did we get here?
Absolutely. And I think what the conversation really starts diving into, how business has operated in the world, but more importantly, from a sustainability or impact lens. Like, what does that actually mean to business, right? And we go back to, the Friedman essay and what is, a business's role really in the world, right? It comes back down to that idea of what is business's role? Is it just to fulfill shareholder pockets, right? Or is it bigger than that? Or is it to be a player for community and people and the relationships it's holding, right? It's more than just transactional. And this debate about the role of business has actually existed, since the early days, since the sort of the formation of business, right? Yeah. In the capitalist system. And we've sort of navigated that. And it wasn't really till, I would say, correct me here, but till maybe the 90s really were where we really started talking about, business and sustainability, business's role in being responsible for its employees, for its communities, to the environment. Up until that point, there was debates really about this idea of shareholder and who is a shareholder. And it was very always sort of coming back to this concept of capitalism and but also there was interjections of the idea of values or what is really valued in these relationships.
Yeah, and it was up until that point, I think it was always capitalism versus another system, and there weren't a lot of questions of maybe we can just improve capitalism or stop this precipitous race to the bottom in capitalism that happened in the 90s. And I think there were two thinkers that kind of rose in the 90s that are crucially important, that deserve their own conversations, is Ray Anderson and the story of interface carpets and this the bold moonshot of becoming the greenest CEO in America, and really the achievement within 5 years of that. And 94 was a huge year. And then 94 also, John Elkington released his book Cannibals with Forks, in which the phrase, the triple bottom line, was coined, the people, planet, profit. And so you're absolutely right. In the 90s, this started to shift. And we're kids of the 90s. I remember watching the battle in Seattle on the news of these activists disrupting, global economic summits in various cities and countries, and this idea that something is wrong with this. The system is not working. Something's wrong with this, and we need to right this. And that the idea of writing it was slowly building over time, and we saw the introduction of B Corp in 2006, and then the first certified B Corps in 2007. In Canada, it was federally adopted in 2010. And so we saw this, we started to see this momentum behind these ideas 2019 was a huge year. There were other indicators. There was Larry Fink's letter to CEOs in 2018. You know, there were some big moments,
which I think was like it was significant because it like almost gave permission to mainstream business and mainstream investors and capitalists to be like, oh, okay, this is important. Sustainability is important, so we better pay attention, right? Yeah. We really saw the rise of like ESG, and we saw the rise of the sustainability officer.
Yeah. Briefly. And like 2019, honestly, Greta Thunberg did so much.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, she was focused on climate, but like 2019 was the year of Greta. It was the year of the Australian wildfires. Remember that? Like a billion animals perished in those fires. It felt like people were really waking up to this idea that we have to do something better. There was the business roundtable, all of these things, even though, come on, like we had, like, not we, but you know, Trump represents a lot of things, and that 2017 pulling out of the Paris Agreement. Yeah. And, you know, so, you know, there's always, you know, systems are going to oppose that friction that is demanding change. And that's just the way it is. But I don't know about you, Joe, but like Decade opened January 1st, 2020. Because I was like, this is it. It's the year, we were through the year of fire. This is the year of change and performance and action. And then, you know, there was somebody got a cold, and then we had a global pandemic, and it was singular. Yeah. But I cannot believe we're here right now in terms of the world of sustainability. I thought we were like going to the promised land. I really did.
You know, it's interesting because, I was originally going to start Ideas for Impact, which is my consultancy, in 2020. And then the global pandemic hit. At the time, I was running League of Innovators, and we had just like all of these young people that like needed support. And like the team was across the country. And at the time I was like, okay, I need to sort of lean into this work right now because it feels really timely and important. And as we moved sort of through that first year of the pandemic into the second year is sort of when I ended up leaving that organization and starting my consultancy. And at that time, I remember having conversations with my mentors and folks in the industry and the startup industry and the investment industry, and they're like, this is the time. Everybody wants ESG. Everybody wants sustainability. You're going to be so successful. Everyone's going to want to work with you. And I was like, that's right. The tides are changing. And what we did, having been in this sort of sustainability space for quite a long time, it was exciting to see finally that shift into this going mainstream. Most businesses talking about it, with ESG coming online too, and just having that becoming a reality from a regulatory perspective and a standards perspective. It was no longer, we were talking about it not necessarily being voluntary. It was moving down the line in Canada, in the United States, in Europe, where it has continued to move forward. For this to actually be a regulatory requirement that every business needed to think about. And then, Trump happened again. and a lot of things went sideways in this space. And
then Trump happened again. And what a day, right? What a day. But the backlash had, it's not all Trump. Like, he just let the creepers come out from their
it's like giving people permission to act badly. It's people giving people permission to act badly and not be accountable for a lot of their activities and their decisions.
And sadly, a lot of people doing the baddies are really good at being baddies. And that is part of the problem. Like, when you're just business as usual, you go to the floor. It doesn't matter. You just go right to the mat. And, we in the, kind of purpose-driven business sustainability world, like we are trying to maintain some kind of decorum and some kind of focus on like what is the right way to do things. And I do sometimes wonder if we need to, I think for sure we need to be more bold in how we do things. But, you know, when we have, you know, I have some quotes here.
Yes.
And so one of the things I think is so interesting, in 2020, this is from Davos in 2020. I'm going to pronounce all the names wrong for this episode and every episode because I always pronounce the names wrong. So I apologize in advance. Brian Moynihan, the CEO of Bank of America. This is a quote from Davos in 2020. If you're thinking you can produce a profit, if you're a shareholder and not addressing your owners and not address your employees, you're going to have a problem. Our research team has declared that in the next decade, one of the 10 trends is moral capitalism, and that's where the investor money is going to flow. 2020 Davos. Moral capitalism. 2020. This is why, and this is January 2020. This is even before COVID. And then COVID happened, and then bam, everybody went into their houses and they were thinking about what are they doing? We saw, whether it's true or not, the dolphins are in the Venice canals and people are seeing the Himalayas for the first time in their lives. And we got to see this like moment of these like hope spots where the earth was like actually regenerating. We cut carbon emissions dramatically. It allowed us to kind of test this idea of not only resilience, but like real regeneration. And I was here for it. And I thought, my God, I've been waiting my whole life for this moment. This is amazing. You know, Joe, I'm really curious. Like, let's say it's like January 2021. Like we have, I think by that time we had a vaccine, but the purpose revolution was still in full swing. And like, what were you thinking? Like, what was your idea of what was going to happen? What did you think was going to happen?
Well, I mean, 2021 through to 2022 is sort of like when I went and launched my business, had lots of conversations in this space, so much opportunity that we were seeing, so much interest either of people already like hiring sustainability teams to come in and build up their, you know, entire ESG strategies, or we had companies hiring consultant teams to do that. We saw big consultancies start off entire ESG units. We saw companies build out ESG platforms. We also saw not that it just started in that period, but we saw like a continued growth in impact investing and in capital flowing into this space and into the investment of companies and that were building in this, whether it's in health tech or climate tech or, you know, other sort of everything in that space. We saw lots of investment there. And so there was an interest. Like I always talk about this. It was starting to be really mainstream. Everybody you would talk to, they're like, oh yeah, I've heard of this term. I've heard about this. Like, you know, we had famous entrepreneurs and investors talking about, especially the concept of ESG and why it was important, and this idea of values and morals, and just the number of mentions of just the concept of the word ESG, the acronym ESG, which stands for Environment, Social, and Governance. It tenfolded across media in those years. And so I truly, being a little bit more on that ESG side too, and seeing that work, I really thought we were like sprinting towards regulatory requirements, right? Like we were looking at what's coming. Like there was serious work being done in the US with the SEC, right? Of that moving forward with regulations around this in Canada as well, in Europe. And And so, yeah, I really thought we were going to be like heading into a new era. That this was a requirement from all businesses, and you couldn't hide behind, which I know we talk about even in our bios on our websites, like good marketing. You couldn't hide behind good marketing and good slogans. You had to actually deliver like what it is that you're claiming you're doing. You had to prove that you were doing that work.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think, for a decade, by like the beginning of 2022, the doors had just blown off. We were so busy, and it was absolutely wonderful. It really was. It was amazing. Just every day waking up, and it's like, we're here. Like, we've arrived. I started this work in, really like many, many, many years ago, but formally in 2013. And so I was like, the ramen years are over. Like, I can, like, this is a thing that is happening, and the train has left the station, and it's not going to stop. And, I thought by 2030, like, we were going to be in a position where we were not going to exceed 1.5 degrees temperature rise over pre-industrial levels. Like, I really was like, this is it. And well, hasn't been the case. And
that is not
honestly, and some of it, and the ESG backlash was always happening.
Right. It always was. Yes.
Always was.
Like, it was because it was that when you're just making claims without actually doing the work, of course you're going to revolt against something that's coming down the pipeline, which is literally a pipeline. It's going to make you require measurement of the things that you say you're going to do or you're doing, and then you're not doing them, to like actually have to prove that. Like, of course, this is like, you're not going to like that.
So, okay, I'm gonna poke a little bit here. So, I have a quote for you, but before I read that quote, I just want to get your impression of, what is Milton Friedman's business as usual look like? Like, in the simplest form, what does it look like?
I think Milton Friedman's like business as usual truly is like about like, it's about making money, right? Like, and at the core part, if you're not making money, you're not doing right by your shareholders, whoever they might be. One might be 1,000 of them. And so like, if you're not doing that as a business, you're failing.
Yeah.
I think for me,
but
like,
it's not the many, right? It's not for the many.
It's not. Well, no, of course it's not.
Right?
No.
So
no,
I want to read you a quote. So I do think with the ESG haters and with a lot of the baddies, and I'm just straight up calling them baddies because I feel like we're goodies and we can do that. With the baddies, there's a lot of projection. And so I would like to read you a quote from Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, on pulling $2 billion back from BlackRock in 2022. ESG sacrifices return at the altar of the select few, unelected corporate elites and their radical woke agendas.
Of course.
How? Come on, that's crazy.
Of course.
Like, ESG that is a description of traditional capitalism, sacrificing returns, sacrificing profit at the altar of a select few. I feel like it's so.
It's like the opposite of actually, like, because they're mad, right, about having to share, the wealth. Of
it's
of
like
what they're creating.
It's, to me, it's so intense, so now we let's talk about the regression, and
which that quote is directly related to some of the like right?
So it was happening in 2022 when we were like, this is it. We have nailed it. We're going forward. These things were happening. So not surprising at all that, well, a little bit surprising actually for me. A year later, Larry Fink is quoted as saying, I'm not going to use the word ESG because it's misused by the far left and the far right. So the language is kind of being dismantled. And when they start dismantling language, we know that systems are going to follow. So,
and it's so interesting because like I saw you put that quote in our notes and I was like, oh, and I had like a different Larry Fink quote in there or like that story in there as well. And when you layer those two events on top of these quotes on top of each other, you actually see the connection. And so during this time, right, in 2022, Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, actually pulled $2 billion from BlackRock, which is, the organization that the investment that Larry Fink is.
Larry Fink is like this,
the leader of
$10 trillion man at this point.
In 2020, every year he writes this famous letter. Everybody posts it's posted everywhere. People take it as like
it's kind of a big deal.
It's a big deal, right?
Yeah.
It gives people permission or operators permission or not. And in 2020, that letter mentioned ESG 26 times, but by 2022, it only mentioned it once. And by 2023, it mentioned it 0 times.
Yep.
And in 2023 is when, and that's when he actually says that quote was like, I'm not going to play by this ESG thing anymore because, it's like everyone's co-opting it, but really he's following the money because a lot of money just got pulled from his fund.
Yeah.
And it wasn't by a leftist.
Absolutely. And again, because we're talking about the regression at this point, we thought it was, we were stubbornly optimistic about what was happening. So I just also, previously I had mentioned this quote by Brian Moynihan, the CEO of Bank of America in 2020. And he said one of the 10 trends is moral capitalism. And that's where the investor money is going to flow. Yeah. That's in January 2020. All right. This is the first likely of many Doing Good, Badly re-records. We're just jumping in here to do a little re-record because I couldn't find my notes for a million years. And now they're here.
Yeah, we want to make sure that all of you wonderful listeners that are with us are getting the right information.
Yeah, we don't want you to come for us in the comments. So here you go. Okay. April 2021, in Geneva, Carney is the special envoy for climate action, and he co-founds the Net Zero Banking Alliance with 43 banks, including the Bank of America. And the commitments, there were a number of commitments, but the major commitments were to be net zero by 2050, to always be performing annual emissions reporting, and by 2030 to have interim goals. So, Mr. Moynihan's bank is on the masthead of the Net Zero Banking Alliance. He's right there, kind of lockstep with Carney. At its peak, it managed 40 trillion in assets. The Net Zero Banking Alliance was comprised of 40 million in assets with these 43 banks. 40 trillion.
Which is amazing. And this was like where we were like, yes, like the tides are
turning. And the bankers are doing it? If the bankers are doing it, it's real. It's not like Ben and Jerry's like patchouli impact.
It's not the converted, right? These are like people that genuinely never saw this as a real value in like creating financial value in the markets.
Right? This is huge. The alliance holds the world's biggest banks, including the principal financiers of the world's largest fossil fuel companies. It was voluntary. There was no enforcement, and there was really no universal definition of net zero, which is a theme that we're probably going to touch on lots in Doing Good Badly. So 2022, the backlash is already really happening. And so now we start to see the tide really shifting. The political cost of membership in the Net Zero Banking Alliance starts to felt and outweigh the benefits.
Capital holders like the BlackRocks of the world start pulling back. Not just like one piece or two, but they literally start obliterating ESG and their commitments all together in the work that they're doing, right? Which is huge. And it's to that story of suddenly ESG is being sacrificed left, right, and center.
Right. And we see this, this trend in the banks, those banking members, those 43 banks. They don't flip the table and leave. But they just go silent. They just go very, very quiet. And so the alliance is really kind of crumbling. And in January 2025, the very public exits from the Net Zero Banking Alliance begin. And this is really ahead of Trump's inauguration. That these U.S. banks start leaving. And for Canada, it was really soon that TD, BMO, CIBC, National Bank, RBC, Scotiabank all left. Bank of America is among those departures. And none saying they've abandoned climate goals. It's very classic, like, sign in the window, exit. Like, we don't need this. We're good anyway. We're just going to do what we do. We don't need governance, or we don't need to be in compliance.
Yeah, and this is not a value to our bottom line anymore. Yeah. Right. And throughout this process, as all of these banks started going silent on this alliance and on their commitments. I love this quote or reference to that time and what was happening. This is sort of an expert case of green hushing, right? That you're not actually talking about being part of a movement or, doing the commitments or having the commitments or doing anything towards this, but you're sort of like quietly, not mentioning it anymore. You're not talking about it internally, externally. And it's really a bit of like a stepping back, right, behind the curtain again.
In 1978, the Czech dissident Václav Havel, later president, wrote an essay called "The Power of the Powerless," and in it he asked a simple question: how did the communist system sustain itself? And his answer began with a greengrocer. Every morning, this shopkeeper places a sign in his window: "Workers of the world unite." He doesn't believe it. No one does. But he places the sign anyway to avoid trouble, to signal compliance, to get along.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So October 3rd, 2025, the remaining members of the Net Zero Banking Alliance, they vote to dissolve the organization, and they cease operations immediately. And so that's what happened to Brian Moynihan's moral capitalism. Yep. It didn't take a decade. I love that quote. In the next decade, one of the 10 trends is moral capitalism. Ugh.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, it was just like it was like this wave of suddenly everybody's doing it, everybody's signing up, and then there's the quick demise. Like, if you actually look at this, like, it wasn't a lot of time that we saw this surge and like an immediate, almost like this green hushing era, and then complete, like, we're just going to dissolve this entire movement. Yeah.
And, and I know, like, people can blame it on Trump or blame it on some of these other, events, but, like, that doesn't impact, like, Trump impacted Canada, but, like, not in a way that Canadian banks should be exiting the Net Zero Banking Alliance. Yeah. Right? Like, tariffs and all of this unrest and this, like, rupture. Nonsense. They just left because it was convenient not to have to do any reporting and not to have actual meaningful climate goals.
Absolutely. It was actually hard.
Burn, baby, burn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Burn, baby, burn.
Burn, baby, burn. Thanks for listening to this re-record. We're going to go back to the regular scheduled programming now. Hi,
Back
bye. Hi.
And why I think we were really like emboldened by this speech being like, oh, well, no, we need to be optimistic. Like, we need to continue driving of like, you need to take that sign out of your window and like actually lead with what you believe in and what kind of world you want to live in, right? And as a business in particular, like what kind of world do you want to exist in? What kind of world do you want to contribute to, right? Because every business out there, whether they're tiny or whether they're multinational, they're all contributing to how the business world works. Right? Like, and the smaller
participation. Yeah.
Participation.
This idea of participation. Yeah.
Exactly. And like the smallest actions, like can be the beginnings of a domino effect of how change happens.
Friends, it is time for companies and countries to take their signs down. 4 decades.
Right? And
yeah,
so I
absolutely.
think
like this, preach. This is exactly why I am so kind of in love and enamored with the B Corp movement. B Corp deserves its own episode, I think.
Yes, they do.
And, we can't, there's a lot of changes there. We can't get into that today. But I think this idea of like this grassroots movements and folks voluntarily deciding to take the sign down and what happens when people take the signs down. And so I just want to introduce this idea of like, okay, so what is this, why does all of this matter to, I'm even challenged saying progressive people because it feels like exclusive, but why this should matter to all people is that it's fucked up out there. It's kind of, it is. And, the Ron DeSantis's of the world, they are really making a lot of ground right now. This anti-ESG, like, we just don't even talk about sustainability in the same way that we did. And we certainly don't talk about it with limits. And that we have this urgency, like the urgency has left the conversation right now. And that is troubling. And so I want to introduce a couple quotes here that I think are really, like warnings, but also like a warning and an inspiration. Andrew Winston is an MIT Sloan, in the MIT Sloan Management Review in July 2025. In an essay called Advancing Sustainability in a Climate Silence, said, the fundamental drivers of sustainability have not changed. We face enormous shared challenges. Time is running short and the stakes are too high for both society and business for companies to go backward. So that's the warning. Like we know this, like you and I, Joe, we know this. We need to move forward. But it's quiet out there right now and it's weird. So there's lots of warnings and we could do we could record for many hours just talking about those warnings. But that's not the truly interesting thing, I think. I think I want to, share another quote. Again, not going to pronounce her name right. Christiana Figueres. I'm not saying that right. She's the architect of the Paris Agreement. And in an interview with NPR, The Future We Choose, she said, for me, optimism is a well-informed, deeply in touch choice that we make to transform the pain into conviction and agency. It is not the output of something that we have achieved. It is the input. So optimism is the input into these systems and into change. And it's the thing that we need right now.
More than
ever. And I think, in Carney's speech, he really offered this idea of optimism and imagination, and especially in this idea of the third path. And so I would love if I could take you on a little journey, Joe, into something that has captured my imagination as of late, which is capitalist realism. Had you ever heard of capitalist realism before I?
No, actually, I hadn't. The first time I heard about it was when we were in your living room and you were telling me about it. And I was, I heard it and I was like, oh, absolutely.
What
it makes
is this?
So much sense. I can't wait to dive more into it.
Okay, so there's a few things that I think we agree on. We have to take our signs down. Greengrocer, we've got to take our signs down. And I will be so bold as to say that business as usual and mean capitalism is kind of a cult. And we are all participating in this thing. And I think just to let that kind of sit there for the listener, in my opinion, it's a cult. And the way we think about breaking free from it and imagining, bringing stubborn optimism and this kind of like a revolutionary imagination or stubborn imagination, I think those are the things that we need to start to expand our perspective on what's possible. And so capitalist realism, what is it? It's basically the idea that capitalism has become so dominant in our minds, our culture, our everyday life, that we are incapable of imagining anything to replace it or anything different. We're even incapable, as the ESG backlash shows us of imagining even a slight transformation of capitalism itself. It's not even changing a system. It's just making it a little kinder. That is also considered kind of beyond imagination for so many folks. And there's this, and so this theory was developed, by Mark Fisher, and he wrote a book, Capitalist Realism: Is There No Alternative, in 2009. I'm not an expert on capitalist realism, but it is something that's kind of really captured my imagination. And so that, the widespread sense in this, the widespread sense is that not only is capitalism the only viable political and economic system, but also that it is now impossible even to imagine a coherent alternative. Another quote that kind of sums that up is, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Which I think
so
is so powerful and okay. When that is all staring down at us too, the reality of climate change and polycrises and all of that. And I actually want to give you or bring in another concept, which I think to build on this idea of capitalist realism. For those of you who might be familiar with Neil Gaiman, he's a famous author. Could think whatever we want about him, but he is the author of American Gods as well as other famous novels. Yeah. Okay, in his novel, in this book, he writes about the idea of gods, right? And the concept is that old gods die when people stop believing in them, and that new gods replace them because not because of the god itself, but because humans give that idea devotion and time instead. And so in the book, he talks about this, the god of money, markets, and capitalism, and whatever you want to call it, right? You can call it many things. And so that god didn't need a temple at all, right? And it got built in every incentive structure, in every if you think about it, it's every compensation package, every time there's a business. And it's that's just the way things work. And so that's just like another way to think about it. Obviously, this is like a work of fiction. It's just like out there, but it's like that idea. I mean, he wrote this book as a reflection of this, like, conceptualization of like these new ideas and concepts and sometimes just like things that people found really important and they put them on a pedestal. And I think capitalism and money is like one of those things.
Yeah. And I love this, and I love that you brought that in, because I think it's like the idea of God. The thing that I'm thinking is that with like capitalist realism, it's so deeply ingrained in us that that's the only way, that it's considered like we consider it a part of the natural forces of the world. We consider it like climate or the Earth's orbit around the sun. It's just a thing that it's a physical reality for us. And if you have that mindset, of course, it's kind of impossible to change it. If we're, I'm not a student of philosophy. Socrates was in the cave. You know, like you're in the cave and you just turn around and walk out of the cave. There's a whole thing out there. You know, we're spending our time looking at the shadows on the wall, but like there's a whole other world out there. And I think we've both been incredibly lucky to be in the world outside the cave. Like we're looking at like what are the possibilities here all the time in our own practices. And yeah, money is a god, that's for sure. Yeah. And so capitalism is a vibe. It's not a physical reality. It's a vibe. It's a thing that we're in right now, but we could be in something else.
And it's like we constructed it, right? Like I think that's an important. We constructed the system and the concept and have put it into play.
And Mark Fisher says of capitalist realism that you don't have to like it, you just have to participate to keep it going. You don't have to like it. Cynicism is a part of it. Like you don't have to be excited about how it works. But if you're locked in it, you're participating, you're still moving it forward. So I think that is also like the idea of,
Yeah, and it goes back, like, it's back to that Havel, like that story too, right? Like if you don't have to like it, but you're participating. And then like you can't change something if you're continuously participating without challenging the system or whatever it is.
The system's power comes not from its truth, but from everyone's willingness to perform as if it were true. And its fragility comes from the same source. When even one person stops performing, when the greengrocer removes his sign, the illusion begins to crack.
And you can't change something if you think that you don't see your own agency in changing, which I also think is such a huge part of our work as consultants, is helping folks understand and seeing like what agency they have to make changes. And so, just to dig a little bit deeper into this idea of capitalist realism, how it kind of became invisible, and capitalism won by convincing us all that we don't have a choice, and folks that are benefiting continue to convince us and keep us in this mindset of like there's no alternative. And if you think of an alternative, you're crazy. You're just crazy. There's a great there's like the Hollywood theory as kind of a subset, I guess, of kind of thinking or philosophy in capitalist realism, that is that we make hundreds and there's thousands and thousands of Hollywood movies and movies in general and stories about love and death and life and the destruction of the planet. But how many films have you ever seen about a new kind of capitalism? they don't exist because people are participating in the idea that that's crazy. So, like Margaret Thatcher said in the 80s, there is no alternative. And if we had more time, we would go deeper into this. But, Fisher says that capitalist realism always kind of existed, but it really took off with Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. It really took off in the 80s. And this kind of like Gordon Gekko, greed is good, culture of capitalism that took us down the kind of rabbit hole to where we are, or started to erode the guardrails for people and mostly for people. Planet didn't have a lot of guardrails ever, but those guardrails started to be eroded in a problematic, like deeply problematic way, and so it's not all dark. Assuming that this is a participatory system and we're all opting into it, there's this kind of idea that I'm trying to find my quote. Okay, so Fisher said in his book, the tiniest event can tear a hole in the gray curtain of reaction which has marked the horizons of possibility under capitalist realism. From a situation in which nothing can happen, suddenly anything is possible. So this idea of this, that capitalism and this idea in our lives is this gray curtain that just kind of hangs over our lives. And that once in a while people come along and tear little holes in it. And then you see the green behind it, and you see this color and this kind of technicolor opportunity of like possibility. And going back to Carney's speech, I'm sure, I don't know what Carney thinks of capitalist realism, but I think that speech was like a big tear in a gray curtain of the way things are. And so this is something that's been really interesting to me is in my own work as a consultant, and especially kind of in teaming and workshops and like those creative processes with companies, is like, where's the little tears? Where's the little tears in the system, in the curtain, that we can like start to pull apart and start to think about their specific, their opportunity, which is huge and universal to change things, but specifically the way they can do it in a way that is like poetic and elegant and just feels like it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I agree. I think the Carney speech most definitely did that. And I think it is an opportunity to reflect on that, on what the future could look like if we just allow ourselves to explore alternative futures. Obviously, what we've been doing as markets hasn't necessarily led to more sustainability. It hasn't led to people being more well off, having necessarily more equality or equity. Like for a moment, maybe even there was terrors again in that opportunity, and they were crawled back quite quickly when there was a broader participation from different groups, which I think is the reality of like where we sit today, dissecting the speech, but also dissecting what's happening in the world of like, can we even create the space to imagine like alternative futures where we are maybe successful in doing this beyond regulation being the only way we get there, right? Like how 100%. Can we create the institutions and the organizations and the spaces for lots of people to be able to work together to create these alternative futures that I know that, people seek, but they really don't know how to do it or where to do it or even how to create, how to even create the container for that.
Okay. So this is just a note for anyone listening about why consultants matter. And, there's consultants are all different. I think I'll speak for myself, and I'm going to project this onto you as well, Joe, that when you're behind the gray curtain and you feel like things aren't right, but you're doing your best, it takes a lot of energy and knowledge and expertise to like tear that curtain and reveal what's behind it. And that honestly should be a guided process. I am a serious believer that these opportunities to like take the sign down, if they are guided and designed and certain conditions are met to actually change people's minds and get them truly excited about possibility, and that imagination is a muscle and positivity and optimism are muscles. And so if you're behind the gray curtain and maybe you're in atrophy a little bit, you know, I think we're kind of I'll speak for myself. I'm a professional imaginer for the companies I work with, right? So
I also think, like, on that note, on the idea of bringing it's the idea of bringing like outsiders to help guide you in the process, because what happens inevitably in any business or organization for that matter is like, if you're in the business doing the work of whatever that's like, making a product or delivering services or delivering programs or building programs, you're not always actively looking at that bigger picture and how you often operate and how your culture works. And so, you know, what the consultant or consultant team often represents is like a specialist coming in and being that outsider, being like, hey, let's review what's happening. Like, you might not be actually able to see what's happening. At the same time, if you're in it, right? If you're in it so deeply, it's also hard for you to objectively be able to change. Right?
No,
That's what we've seen too, right? Like, you're too close to also then lead the change right away when you don't have the tools or the knowledge. Once you have the tools and the knowledge, it becomes a lot easier. But when you don't have that, I think that's where we see people doing badly, because they just they don't have the knowledge or they don't have the tools. And then ultimately that container for that work to really happen well and for that work to be really effective doesn't actually work, right? Because it's not done well. It's like off the side of someone's desk or a department's desk, right? Like, and it's
those
not
poor
given...
people. No, those poor people that it's off the side of their desk. Yeah, like if they're in it, they get it, and they're got the world on their shoulders. They're holding up the world, and I have so much empathy for those champions, those folks that,
and they can't do it on their own. I think this was like what we saw with like the like very short-lived emergence and the celebration of like all our chief sustainability officers, and then like suddenly it was like, well, they can't do everything. You can't just have like one person try to change everything in a multinational environment. Like, how could you expect that one person to be successful when they have to manage like the change of an entire organization, from the people's teams to like the production to like the reporting to like emissions measurements? Like, it is a vast job and it requires a team of its own. And so like, I think we also put very unrealistic expectations on the people that lead the work and do the work of impact. Right. And they're supposed to, when, you know, like, you don't expect like the CFO to do everything from like doing the bookkeeping to doing the controlling to, right. Like, you don't expect that person to play every single role within that department, but we do of the people doing the work and impact. And so I think that becomes like a really hard job.
It becomes it becomes soul crushing because you're so committed. And then I've just seen it so many times. Someone's so committed and they get burnt out, and that again, like, up against that curtain, they're trying to tear holes in it, but like, they don't have the right tools, or they don't have enough time, or no one's listening to them. And no one sees what they see. And so that is I do feel like there's a bit of a mental health crisis with folks in sustainability, impact, JEDI or DEI work,
it is so
which
hard.
are all part of sustainability. I think sustainability needs to be a more encompassing term. So
Okay. So we need like a third path. It is
third
clear.
path. Yeah.
We need a third path, which we know, the speech sort of defines and talks about of like, okay, we need a different way of doing, but like, what does a different way of doing actually look like? Right? Like, I think a lot of people have a hard time imagining what that could be. Markets, absolutely, like too big and too complex for people to even imagine what that could be. But I think like even from like a company perspective, I see lots of folks struggling with just even understanding like what a company doing good really well could actually look like. How could it operate differently other than just having an ESG plan? Right? Like, it's more than that, right? It's not just that one thing. It's certainly not comprehensive enough. Yeah. It goes so much deeper. And so what does like a third path look like, Christy?
Oh my gosh.
What it's now open, like the door has been open, like, and there's a call to action of like, hey, let's really think and then do what we need to do to move forward in a better way.
Yeah. So I think the first piece is that we're not starting from zero. People have been doing this work for a long time. We have the B Corp movement. We have cooperative movements. We have benefit companies, all over the U.S. that aren't certified B Corps that may not be cooperatives, but they have created some structure in their governing documents, their incorporation documents, legally demanding or requiring that they have a purpose beyond profit and that they report against that. So there are things already happening. We're not starting from zero. I think, if we go back to, Mark Carney's speech, so much of what really inspired me about the speech was this, ideas of, moving through the world in a more values-based way. And to me, I discovered capitalist realism maybe a few months before that Carney speech. And I kind of went into a hole. I honestly did. I was like, my God, I'm behind the curtain. I don't know how to get out. People aren't listening. I was, I kind of went there and was really questioning my own practice. And I was really buoyed by Carney's speech and thinking that, like, on the biggest stage in the world, for any Canadian PM anyway, there's a third path. And so, what do you think of that, Joe?
I think, absolutely. I think on that stage, really calling out that this idea that we no longer can operate the way we do was really powerful. And I think part of that too, and it goes back to, like, I think Carney's own history in economics and in the world of, values and sustainability and all the work that he's done there. And recognizing that this work, like, the market is not going to correct itself. No. Right? The market as a whole and the system as a whole is not going to be able to correct itself because it wasn't built to do that. Right? Yeah. And so the only way forward, or the only version of this work that actually ends up working, is if companies and organizations themselves, they need to rethink how they want to do business and what is actually possible. And it is the only way that you can change the system is through these organizations that exist within the system. Otherwise, the system in itself, and he talks about this at length, and we'll do this on another episode, but, like, he talks about this at length in his book, Values. But I think it's really interesting because I think for a long time, a lot of folks are like, let's change the system, let's do all and yes, it doesn't work for the benefit of everybody, but we continue, like, kicking the can of responsibility to the system that can't fix itself. And it's like, well, actually, it's the organizations themselves, and it's the teams and the leadership. And like, we need to go back to that of like, you know, what do you do as a company? You can't like share the responsibility of what your role is within this work. And I think everybody's inclination right now is to do, you know, is to green hush everything, even if they're doing sustainability, even if they're doing impact investments, even if they're actually doing some good work, they're not talking about it in the same way that they were doing it, that they were talking about it a couple of years ago, right? When we were seeing this emergence and this coming to the mainstream. And so how do we go back to that time where people feel emboldened that they can talk about it? Well, like you need to, like, you can't wait for those incentives. Like, you have to drive on your own values of like why you do this work to begin with. Like, if you're doing impact work, but you never talk about it, like, are you actually doing the full scope of the impact work? Which for me is like it comes back down to this, to part of that quote or part of the speech in which he talks about, and I'll quote this, we're no longer relying on just the strength of our values, but also on the value of our strength, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, it's not enough to just have values on your website and have a nice like goal statement or a vision statement. Like, when things become hard, what do you actually do? Yeah. That's really the testament to like what people are doing.
So honestly,
how much do you believe in this? If you're not publicly talking about it, or like, but you were a couple years ago, because like suddenly people aren't as nice to you, or maybe you're not getting as much investment. Like, but then how serious are you about all of this work? It's always like where I come back to. And maybe I'm such an optimist and like believer that like, of course you should stand by those values, and maybe, you know, why you don't just stop talking about them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I've been saying for years, values are verbs. They're not nouns. They're not a decal on the wall. They're not static. These are active guardrails and rules of how you play the game. And they drive towards that purpose or that reason for being for an organization. And I personally think for businesses, they really, really need to kind of dig deeper into what it all means. And if they can get to a really principled place where they're feeling incredibly, where they feel inspired by their own work, then there's a possibility for them to have transformational outcomes for their organization and for their consumers. And consumers, it's not their job to find out how you are, how you're showing up and what you're doing. It's your job to tell them. So I think we're outsourcing, like companies tend to outsource a lot of this work to consumers, or, you know, they're kind of asking other people to do the hard work for them, I think, in a lot of ways. And you need to do the hard work. I think, and this is worthy of another episode, is Mamdani. And, you know, the way he is communicating the wins that they're delivering is that every company should have that same communications approach. We said we were going to do a thing. We did a thing. We celebrated the thing. We made sure everybody knew about the thing. We're on to the next thing. Like that, I think that's really important. And that continues to kind of fuel optimism and fuel imagination. You know, I think about the folks in these companies that are doing the work, but I spend a lot of time thinking about consumers and how they can access the work and how they can be inspired to make decisions and like take the sign out of their own window. Or again, with the capitalist realism, even know that there is a possibility that they could actually buy something, you know, a pair of jeans that's beautiful all the way through, like, you know, or a food product that's like actually regenerative, that supports workers, that, you know, I think so much of this actually comes down to, you know, in this moment of rupture, we really need to find the helpers. And those helpers, if they're quiet, then they're not doing anybody any favors. Those green hushers are
if we don't
more dangerous than they think.
Absolutely. If we don't know the work's being done, then less folks are compelled to do the work, to stand on that, right? And so that's why, sharing, you can decide how much, but that is powerful too, right? Being transparent about the work that you do has impact for others in the ecosystem that you work within. And well beyond too, like you never know.
The mental load for people of capitalist realism and this idea that we're stuck in this way of being that we can't get out of, that is just to give folks that optimism and those opportunities to be genuinely surprised by possibility. That goes so far. And I think that, we should all be trying to create those tears in the curtain and those moments of opportunity. And hey, I think it was Winston Churchill said, never waste a good crisis. So we're in a crisis. So let's not waste it. Let's use it to kind of amplify the work and the opportunities and the stubborn optimism. Yeah.
And in that, I think also like looking to the few that are doing some great work, like the Patagonias of the world, which, deserve their own episode in time. Yeah, they're an episode. But just like, a company like Patagonia and its leadership have really flipped everything on its head in terms of how things are done, from marketing to even like the ownership structure of how Patagonia is now structured and who their shareholders are, right? Like Yvon Chouinard and his team have really created a structure that is different. And a lot of people were like, what are you doing? And they had conviction to do that for a reason, right? There was the real reason for doing that, because they really wanted to not only talk about purpose and impact, but like demonstrate that it's possible. And I think in that, that should be celebrated as well, right? Because I think they're a great example of what could be if we had that creative imagination about like how could things work differently if we just tried. But if you don't ever try, then of course you're going to do badly, because you're not even trying. Even if you try, it could turn badly. It's not to say that everything you do is going to be to work, but if you don't, then like you're not going to make any progress.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, it's fair to say, whether we've named it or it remains to be seen what this time is, we're in a new time. We are in a new time. We're in this, there's an earthquake and everything is shaking, and it's been shaking, really for, the last year, at least for Canadians, it's been shaking with these ideas of like, what does sovereignty mean? And what is it, what are our values as a nation? But I think, we're in this new era, and the new era seems dark because a lot of dark things are happening. It's also a really exciting time to bring some lightness to the whole system and be relentlessly imaginative and kind of stubbornly imaginative and optimistic. And people are hungry for that.
I think
so.
I love that.
Do we want to?
Yeah. I'm gonna say a quote from Emerson, which I think is like interesting. And for the times, do not go where the path may lead. Go instead where there's no path, and leave a trail. Right. This is the time to create, new trails.
Yeah, absolutely. And and it's not necessarily going to be easy, but guaranteed it's going to be exciting. It will be. And
It'll be exciting.
And people are going to be cheering you on. Maybe not all the people, but the right people. So, doing good badly.
Doing good badly.
Download, like, subscribe, tell the world.
Nico, come get some food. There he goes. Oh, so happy. Happy cat.